20 seconds. All right, if we can get started here this morning. They're closing the doors back there, so you can't get out now. So you're stuck in this class. You know, the church here advertises, and very well, that we provide classes for all ages, and that certainly is true. You know, we've got the teenage class back there, and then Logan's teaching the young married, and the preacher's teaching the 30 to 40-year-olds, so we must be the 50 and above group auditorium class, is what I guess that we are. So if you're not qualified for that, now we do not segregate by age in this class. So if you don't qualify in that way, we'll still keep you this morning. So glad to have you this morning. Thanks for coming and being with this class today, and looking forward to teaching. I have to let you know a little bit. I had teaching this class today is costing me money. Yeah, I got a call this week, Ed, to go preach today. The congregation needed me to preach, and I almost called you. I did, but I decided to stick with you today. I just want to say, though, that at the end of class I will be passing the hat. So I hope that'll be all right in that way. All right, we want to be talking about miracles in this class, so we're going to be discussing what I think to be is the greatest miracle. When preacher asked me to teach class, I said I will under one condition: I get to pick the miracles. So this is one that I really wanted to teach. I think it's an interesting study, and I hope that you will agree. So if you had to, grade the Lord's miracles, and He performed many, which one would you put up there at the top as the greatest one? Of all the ones that He did, which was, do you believe, is the greatest one?
Raising Lazarus from the dead.
All right, there you go. See, he nailed it on the head. I do think that the raising of Lazarus, and all of the context that is involved in it that we're going to look at today, and just the story itself, just sets the stage for this being the most dramatic, important to you and I, a miracle that Jesus performed. So if you have your Bible, open up with me. We're going to start today in John chapter 10, and of course the main story is in chapter 11. But I want to kind of set the stage here a little bit as we go through this. If if you go to Jerusalem, they give you one place you can go and see where. Visit the tomb of Lazarus in Bethany. Whether it actually is or not, we don't know, but you can go and visit the place they say it is. Of course, with Jesus, there are two different spots that are supposedly the tomb of Jesus, the old ancient spot that has a big church building built over it, or the garden tomb now that in the 1800s, this area was excavated and this tomb was found. So it's interesting as we discuss the raising of Lazarus here that this idea of tombs came to be. Also understand as we get into the story how funerals were conducted in that day. Today we have the bodies prepared. We have the wake. And then after that, everything is over, then we go to the cemetery for burial. In Jesus' day, of course, it was just the opposite. The body was prepared very quickly. They did not have means to preserve the body. And so the body was cleaned. Various oils and perfumes were anointed to the body. The body was then wrapped, and it was then carried to the burial place. It was buried, and then everyone would go back to the person's home and there would be several days then of mourning and grieving over the loss of the loved one, the wake. So that's how things were conducted in those days as we get started. I want to start in John chapter 10, just kind of set the stage a little bit as we get going here and understand what's going on. In John chapter 10, verse 22, it says, "At that time, the feast of dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple of the portico of Solomon." This was the celebration of the rededication of the temple that took place during the Maccabean time. 164, the temple was retaken, and the temple was restored and rededicated. And from that time on, the Jews have celebrated that rededication of the temple under the Maccabees. And that celebration, by the way, continues today and is known as what? Hanukkah, yes. And you notice it takes place in the wintertime, probably the first or second week in winter here at this particular time. Find that interesting that Jesus, of course, took the time. He loved the temple. It was his Father's house, as he said. He loved being there, and he wanted to celebrate this a very civic type of celebration, much like we would maybe celebrate the 4th of July or something like that. But Jesus really loved the temple, and he wanted to be there for this 8-day celebration. And of course, during that time, he would have stayed with Mary and Martha and Lazarus, his good friends in Bethany, about 2 miles over the Mount of Olives from the city of Jerusalem, and that's where he traditionally and typically would end up and would stay. So Jesus comes and he goes into the temple, and he's part of the celebration. He's there in Solomon's Porch. Solomon's Porch was a huge area. There were 162 large columns rising 100 feet tall. It was a very large area, could house over 100,000 people, visitors and likes in that particular area. So he's visiting there, and everything's going good, but then he gets in a conversation, and the conversation, the Pharisees do not like that. They pick up their stones to stone him, and he eludes them and leaves the area with his disciples. They then go from there, they go down Mount Zion where the temple is. They gather together, their stuff together. They leave Mary, Martha, and Lazarus home probably, and they go back down the mountain through Jericho over to the mouth of the Jordan River, an area called Bethany beyond the Jordan. It is there where we're told where John baptized a great deal. There at the mouth of the Jordan, there were some wadis or large pools of water that would gather in that area. So down they would come. By the way, you have Jericho here, and you have Jerusalem up here. There's a 1,400 to 1,500 feet drop between that, coming down the mountain in a winding road down through Jericho and over to the area where Jesus is teaching and probably baptizing some in the area known as Bethany beyond the Jordan. So while he's there, now we're in chapter 11, verse 1. "Now a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. And it was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick." It's interesting what John does here. John is referring here to an event that had happened chronologically here, but he's thinking back. Remember, he's writing this many years later and identifying this Mary. Yeah, she's the one who, during the last week of Jesus' life, would anoint his feet with oil. So the sister sent word to him, saying, "Lazarus, behold, in whom you love is sick." So he's over here in the area of the Jordan, and messengers are sent, and they finally find Jesus, and they tell him, "Hey, Lazarus, your good friend that you love, he is sick." So what does Jesus do? Well, he just keeps on teaching. he says to them, the sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So he stays there then 2 more days. He loves these people, and he hears that his good friend is sick, and it must be serious if they're calling for the Lord. But he delays his departure for 2 more days while he continues teaching in the area. Then he said to his disciples, and I just imagine after those 2 days, I like to kind of visualize how the story might have gone. At the end of those 2 days, they're around a little campfire at night, and Jesus announces to the group, we're going to Judea again. Judea back up there where Jerusalem is. And his disciples say, wait, Lord, remember they just tried to kill you up there, and you want to go back this soon? They were not very happy with that, and Jesus made this reply, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of the world. That comment always kind of puzzled me. When Jesus said, are there not 12 hours in the day, kind of dividing, day and night. Why would he make that statement? And I've kind of reached the conclusion that Jesus was trying to say, I'm just here a certain time, and I have a lot of things that I got to get done in that time. There's just 12 hours in the day. I've got to take advantage of it. In Jesus' day, at nighttime, everything came to a halt. It's not like our society where our street lights, our streets are lit up, our cities, everything. So he says, during the hours of daylight, I've got to take advantage of this and do the will of God that sent me. Back when we were living in Memphis, the first time, I would stop every morning at a little convenience store and get a little sausage, egg, and biscuit. They made the best sausage, egg, and biscuit in the world, a little convenience store. And I got to know the owner really well, and I knew he was a hard-working man, and I would check out, and I would say, hey, I guess you're just working half a day today. He'd look at me, and I'd say, yeah, just 12 hours. So, that's the way it is. If you want to get everything done, you've got to take advantage of the time that you have. So Jesus says, I've got so much to do, and so we're going back to Judea again to take care of something. And I can just see in the darkness, Thomas stands up, throws his cloak around his shoulders, and says, well, let us also go that we may die with him. This was their mood. They felt this was a dangerous thing. And we kind of criticized Thomas for being doubting Thomas, but he was dedicated to the Lord. He was no coward, and he was saying, if the Lord needs to go back, let's go back, and we'll just hang with him, even if it means death. So then finally he says to them in verse 11, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go that I may awake him from the dead. They thought, well, if he's asleep, then he's getting better. He's getting well. We know when someone is sick, if they're resting and sleeping, their body is healing, and they're thinking that. But finally, he says to them plainly, verse 14, Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. So they make that journey again, back through Jericho, back again up that mountainous trail, winding trail up there, and they come then just outside of Bethany. Jesus sends one of his disciples onto the house. He knows there'll be a crowd there because there's all this wake going on. Lazarus is well known, large crowds. His sister's well known, large crowds. So he sends one of his disciples on to the house. He doesn't want to try to make a scene there. And the person gets Martha secretly, quietly, leads her out, says, the Lord is here. And she runs then to Jesus. falling at his feet and weeping, I'm sure, she says, Lord, if you had just been here, our brother would not have died. She certainly believed that when Jesus came, that he would heal her brother of whatever illness that he had. Perhaps she had heard that he had healed Peter's mother-in-law. She knew of all the other miracles that did, and she just thought that Jesus loved Lazarus so much that he would have surely would have healed him. Not real sure that that would have been the case if Jesus had still been in Jerusalem, that he would have healed Lazarus. It wasn't exactly how he, or the reasons that he performed these miracles. Paul was able to perform miracles, but he writes at one time, Trophimus I left at Miletus sick. Had to leave one of his own members sick. Why didn't he just heal him and bring him on? But sometimes miracles weren't done just for personal things. But anyway, Martha firmly believed that if Jesus had been there, Lazarus wouldn't have died. Jesus wouldn't let his dear friend die. And so Jesus says to her, your brother will rise again. Verse 23, Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Remember, Martha was the lady that kind of, she was always in the kitchen and serving when Jesus was there, taking care of him, always going about her duties. Remember, she complained because Mary, her sister, would sit there at the feet of Jesus, listening to every word, and meanwhile she's up cooking and doing the dishes and all that, waiting on the Lord. But evidently she had an ear to what he was saying, because she said, I know that my brother will rise again on the last day. She was familiar with the Lord's teachings in that regard. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even if he dies. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? If you die, you will live. Everyone who dies, if you believe in me, will live. Do you believe that? I think that's a question that we all need to ask ourselves. Do you believe that you will live after you die? Is that the hope that we all have? Is that really, as we're on our deathbed, do we have that assurance? So much so that we welcome death, because we know that if we die, we will live again. And to enjoy the blessings of eternal life, we must, the seed has to be put in the ground, and the seed has to die to sprout a new life. So, do we today really believe that everyone who lives and believes in me will never die? I hope all of us in this room do believe that. She said, yes, Lord, I have believed that you are the Christ, the Son of God, even he who comes into the world. Another great confession here. We talk about the confession of Peter. Well, here's another great confession by this sweet lady as she is grieving over the loss of her brother. But she makes this beautiful statement that, yes, you are the Christ, the Son of God, that you've been sent here in the flesh to be with us. You have come into the world. At that point, Jesus sends someone else to the house again, and he wants to get Mary. And so they go to the house and they find Mary. And Mary, when she hears that the Lord is near, she goes running out of the house. And all of the mourners that see that think, well, she's going to the tomb again, and they all follow. So here now is this large group of people with Mary running to the Lord, and they're all weeping, they're all grieving, tears are flowing freely. And Mary finally makes it to Jesus and says, again, Lord, if you had been here, our brother would not have died. They had this belief that you just know during those hours that Lazarus was facing death, that their thoughts were, oh, if the Lord would just arrive, if he'll just get here, he'll take care of things. But God sometimes has other plans than our plans and our wishes. So that the Jews that were in the house and consoling her, when they saw, verse 31, saw her go quickly and followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to weep there. So when she saw Jesus, she fell at his feet, saying, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And when Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and was troubled. And he says, where have you laid him? And Jesus weeps. What a powerful scene in a moment that is. They're outside of town, and the tears are flowing. And Jesus' heart is just rendered. His spirit is troubled to see what a heartache that death can bring upon a family. And in his humanity, he can no longer fight back the tears, and he begins to weep as well as they then lead him to the tomb. Quite natural, I think, for him to want to go visit the tomb. I'm sure they thought nothing that was very proper. We families do that right after sometimes the burial. We like to go to the gravesite and see the site, and over the years we do visit the grave sites of our loved ones. And so Jesus says, come show me where his tomb is. And so they lead Jesus to this tomb. The tomb is in a cave that's been excavated out to provide as a burial site. This would lend itself to the concept of that Lazarus was a man of some means, of some wealth, to be able to own such a place and to provide such a place to be buried. There are tombs being discovered almost yearly in the Jerusalem area. The last time I was there several years ago, we visited a new tomb that had been found that of some very wealthy person. You kind of go in and they dig out of the rock like a bed for the body to be laid. And this one had beds for like 7 or 8 people, where the whole family would be buried in those areas. So Lazarus had a tomb, and so they carried him now to the tomb. So verse 38, Jesus, again being deeply moved within, came to the tomb, and it was a cave, and a stone was lying there. Of course, they would cover the entrance with a large stone to prevent, of course, animals from getting in, as well as grave robbers, perhaps. So here this large crowd now of emotional people weeping as they make their way to the tomb. And there stands finally Jesus standing there at the moment, seeing where his beloved friend is. And there's all of his disciples. They're wondering what Jesus is going to do, just puzzled by the whole matter. And here's all this large group of weepers that are there, thinking they're just there for a short visit, and Mary and Martha standing beside the Lord as he stands there gazing upon the tomb of his good friends. And then he turns to Martha and says, remove the stone. Can you just hear the gasp at that moment? Martha grabs the Lord's arm and says, no, Lord, he's been dead for 4 days. The stench, the smell, no. Remove the stone, no. But Jesus gives her that assurance to her. He says, did I not say to you that if you believe that you will see the glory of God? And so she nods her head, approval to remove the stone. As I look at that scene, I can only see one way that event is handled, and that as Jesus turns to some of his disciples, these young fishermen, these athletic young men, come and move this stone away. I don't think that would have been very appropriate. So here, Peter and Andrew, James and John, or whomever, they come and they roll the stone away. And there Jesus stands looking into the darkness of this tomb. Lazarus, come forth. You could have heard a pin drop as people looked at one another. What? And then slowly a little rustling sound from the tomb. And then a shuffling sound. And then there he is, standing there, wrapped still in all of the wrappings, even his face cloth. Can you imagine the gasp, the sense of unbelief mixed with the joy as they all stood just spellbound, unable to move? Finally, Jesus says in almost a comical way, you want to release him and set him free. You want to go unwrap this guy? Can you imagine that scene as they're unwrapping and they take the face cloth and there is their brother that looks at them and smiles? That moment is just one of the most amazing scenes, I think, in all of Jesus' life as Lazarus comes forth in and is welcomed again. Now the story gets really interesting. It says, verse 45 of chapter 11, therefore many of the Jews who came to Mary and saw what he had done believed in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them the things which Jesus had done. Aha! So this had a tremendous impact. Jesus had raised others from the dead. He raised the widow's son up in the little village of Nain, and had raised her son as he came into the little village. It was coming out. He saw the woman weeping. It was her only son. He had compassion. He raised him from the dead. But other than getting word about in the village, it's up in Galilee, probably not much was said of that. The other one was the raising of Jairus' daughter, 12-year-old daughter. But again, that was done. Jesus had all the people leave the room. Only the mother and father and Peter and John were there. He raised her from the dead. He told mom and dad, don't tell anybody about this. So those two things were handled way up there in Galilee, were kind of quietly handled. But here, outside of Jerusalem, a large group of very influential citizens from Judea sees this unbelievable event of a man that was dead for 4 days, that they had been weeping over for 4 days, weeping over a dead man for 4 days, and now he's alive again. Many of them believed, I would think so. But there were always those that were on the Pharisee side. So they go back to Jerusalem and they tell the Pharisees what had taken place. And this was the straw that really broke the camel's back. The high priest Pharisees, my time's short, we'll just rush through this. They have a meeting and they decide that they have to do something, that too many people are believing in him. They believe that Jesus is going to somehow take over the power in Jerusalem, that the Romans then are going to come in and destroy the city because of that, and they were just concerned. So at that point, they planned that he must die. I think that's in verse 53. So from that day, they planned together to kill him, beginning at verse 53. So Jesus leaves Jerusalem. He goes up into Ephraim, spends the rest of the winter there before going back around a couple months later and returning back to Jerusalem. So they planned to kill him, and within 2 months they killed him. In 2 months they killed him, yes.
I've got a note here that I made at some point saying this event sealed Jesus' fate.
It did, yeah. It was the real turning point, the consequence. Yeah.
There was a determined effort from that point forward.
See, why this is certainly the greatest miracle is not just in the event itself, but in the consequences of what followed with the Pharisees making that final decision that Jesus needed to be put to death. And so this would have happened, I kind of think, sometime in January. So February, March, April, 2 or 3 months later, they had him dead. So that was their plan and exactly what they would do.
Their plan, of course, was within God's plan, and it was within Jesus' time frame, and this is the time of light, and he had an opportunity to be able to prove that I am the resurrection and the life, and then they would have their time of darkness because it's within the will of God.
Yeah, Jesus knew, when he said, oh, they're not 12 hours in the day, Jesus knew that the clock was ticking. And he knew that eventually, while he had evaded them at the Feast of the Tabernacles, while he evaded them several times, he knew that the clock was ticking, and he knew that eventually they would make good on their efforts. Let me go through quickly some lessons that we have here. First of all, we have to understand that no story gives to us a greater picture of the humanity of Jesus as a man than does this story. The emotions that you see him feeling here for his friend and for those that are weeping over him certainly show that Jesus was 100% man. He came and took on human flesh, and with that came all the emotions that comes with it. John wrote, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Hebrew writer says, we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. Again, Hebrews 2:17, he was made like his brethren in all things, and tempted as we were without sin. The humanity of Jesus, to feel the compassion and the pain that death would bring upon a loved one is on full display here. And those two little words, Jesus wept, in the setting in which it occurred, showed the tremendous empathy that Jesus had and how he felt. Even though he knew the eventual outcome, seeing the pain among those he loved, he couldn't fight back the tears any longer. It got to him like it gets to all of us when we see loved ones hurting and when we lose loved ones. Jesus wept, and he was a man that felt the emotions like we do. So that humanity is gone into in great detail in the book of Hebrews, with Jesus serving as our high priest, with his sacrifice of his own blood, his physical blood. And then as we think of the pain and the agony that he felt in his crucifixion, he came in flesh and blood, God among us, in flesh and blood form. It's just difficult to comprehend, but this story certainly shows his humanity. The second great lesson that this shows to us, it should be very faith-building to us, is that the power of Jesus to raise someone from the dead. It didn't matter. Jesus raised some from the dead who had only been dead for an hour or 2 or 3. Lazarus, his body was in decay. Martha knew that body would be decaying. There would be a stench. When we die, the body begins to decay very rapidly. But it doesn't matter about that. God still has the power to raise us from the dead. And we have to recognize that and understand how important it is that we believe in that. This is just quickly from 1 Corinthians chapter 15. Now, if Christ is preached that he's been raised from the dead, how do some among you say there's no resurrection of the dead? I think probably a lot of worldly people out there just don't believe in that we will be raised from the dead. That's an unusual concept for the world to understand. We know better, or we believe better. Paul says, but if there's no resurrection of the dead, not even Christ has been raised. Christ being the first fruits, the resurrection of Jesus from the tomb is fulfilled and capitalizes upon the power of God to raise us from the dead. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is vain, and your faith is also vain. If Christ did not come out of that tomb, then why are we here? Our faith is vain. We're just a nice group of 50-plus-year-olds. But the fact that we believe that Jesus came out of that tomb has changed our life and how we live our life. The fact that he was raised from the dead. So this.
Lazarus was upset. I mean, he was in paradise, probably the spirit. But when the Lord brought
It would
him
have been an interesting conversation to have, wouldn't it? You know what's interesting too about Lazarus? Not only in that meeting do we read that they not only decided that Jesus needed to be put to death, but later they see that Lazarus, he's walking around, that he is such a billboard for Jesus' power and that he was the Messiah. They decided he needed to be put back in the tomb again. So yeah, it's rather interesting. When Jesus comes back to Jerusalem, at the end of the Sabbath, they have a big feast at the home of a guy named Simon, and Lazarus and Jesus are invited there in Bethany, and Mary and Martha are there. Everybody is there. Wouldn't you like to have been a fly on the wall there? And Jesus and Lazarus sitting there talking, what their conversation must have been like. Really been important. And just finally here, as our time is quickly coming to an end here.
Hey, Dennis,
Yes.
you're mentioning this shows the power of Jesus by raising Lazarus from the dead after being in the grave for 4 days. I heard a preacher say one time that when Jesus said, Lazarus, come forth, he had to say Lazarus because if he just said, come forth, everybody in the grave would have come out.
Yeah. You had to be specific, didn't you? Yes,
And to
that's
be
right.
specific.
And just call out the one name, yes.
And so in our end of time, there is going to be a general resurrection, and there will be everybody come forth, and there will be a general resurrection.
Be a great resurrection.
That shows the power of
Yes.
God there.
Be a great resurrection, yes. And that is what we certainly believe. And then finally, this lesson also teaches us the great influence of Christ here. Christ has always been an influencing and polarizing figure. Those that saw Lazarus come out of the tomb, many of them believed, and many of them ran to the Pharisees to try to disavow him as the Messiah. So there's always been, as Jesus said, you're either for me or against me. So that he's always been that polarizing figure that you either follow Jesus, you're either with me or you are against me. And this scene here shows that very well, as many in that crowd believed in Jesus, many then ran to the Pharisees to do Jesus harm. Remember, Pilate asked, what shall I do with this Jesus who is called the Christ? And that's always been a question that every person has to answer about who Jesus is. Is he indeed the Son of God? Did he indeed perform these great miracles? And does he have the power today to raise me from the dead? And look what I have done here. You will not be recognized as being present. If you leave, I'm going to give you 3 minutes before that second bell rings to make sure you get credit here, or Brother Joe will be calling you on the phone here, saying, why were you not in class? So I'll pass those instead of the hat. How will that be? Thank you for being here.